what has been an absolute constant thread in the way that I look at fertility and I look at health is the fact that the body knows what to do. The body is so innately wise and so perfect in so many ways. And one of the things that I am so in awe about is how, when you remove the obstacles to optimum health, you all of a sudden have an entirely different conversation with the body about fertility.
What if your body is not something you have, but is something you are? Welcome to the Brilliant Body Podcast. I'm your host, Ali Mazet, somatic therapist and sexologist with a lifelong fascination for the challenges and opportunities that come with being the bodies that we are. Join me and other body masters as we explore the art, science, and brilliance of the body and debunk the mind-body split by expanding the meaning and experience of intelligence, which goes way beyond just thinking. So let's dive in. My next brilliant guest, Gabriela Rosa, is completing her doctorate at Harvard and is a Harvard-awarded fertility specialist, founder of the Rosa Institute, and author of Fertility Breakthrough: Overcoming Infertility and Recurrent Miscarriage When Other Treatments Have Failed. She is a pioneer in telehealth-based integrative fertility care, bringing evidence-based reproductive solutions to individuals and couples around the world. Gabriela is also the creator and host of the Fertility Challenge, a free global online program that supports tens of thousands of participants each year. Through her proprietary FERTILE method, Fertile Method, she's helped more than 204,000 people across 111 countries. Published research on her signature program shows a 78.8% live birth rate amongst patients, even after years of infertility, recurrent miscarriage, and unsuccessful treatments. It is such a pleasure and an honor to welcome Gabriela Rosa to the Brilliant Body Podcast. Here we go. Good morning.
Hey, Ali, how are you?
I am hearing you now. I just have been listening to you this last day and just wanted to acknowledge your beauty and your brilliance. And I'm just really touched by what you're doing and
Oh, that's so
by,
sweet.
yeah, by how passionate you are and how much of your life path and commitment and dharma is just so focused on what you're doing with this work. It's beautiful. So I just wanted to
You make me
acknowledge that.
cry.
Good. Yeah.
I don't usually come to these interviews to cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's why I wanted to begin with that, because I just want to just be here with you. And I also want to have a conversation that you may not have normally while you're being interviewed, because it's for a book, because there's certain cultural mores of how to do these things. And I want to just stretch some of those boundaries too, partially because our missions overlap, but in an interesting way. I'm more and more in the realm of the philosophy and the sociology of the body and all the different ways that we experience ourselves as bodies. And when I received your email, I was thinking about, what is it to be or to know that you're a fertile body? How does that affect one's experience in the world and in oneself? And what happens when you're not sure whether you're a fertile body and maybe you want to be, maybe you don't want to be? And so I'm just particularly interested. We can certainly get into your book and all the amazing things you know to help people that are more specific. But I wanted to begin because you have this unique perspective an insight, no doubt, on what it means to be fertile to a person and what happens when you don't know if you are, or maybe know that you will never be. And you might want to start with your own experience of that question.
Love that. That's really lovely. And I do appreciate a new way of articulating this conversation, and certainly from the perspective of things that we don't think about very often. So, yeah, I'll be very happy to have that conversation for sure. I love that. And I've been having such interesting experiences lately that have really taken me to question quite a lot of things in terms of meaning. And I think that this is such a beautiful conversation because it opens that up to people questioning for themselves what is the meaning of it all. So yeah, I'm delighted.
So let's do that. Let's talk about the meaning of fertility. And obviously, it could be the difference between life or death if you didn't get fertile, if you were a queen, for example, or a female in different kinds of societies where if you didn't get pregnant, you were in dire straits. And also, you wouldn't have children to plow your fields, or you wouldn't have the joy of having your offspring and all these things. So there's just inherent meaning, but there's lots of us, myself, for example, who did not have children, which is a whole other sidebar, perhaps, that we'll get into. But I'm just curious about, yes, for you, what have you been thinking about the meaning of fertility, individual or collective?
So I just think it's such an interesting question because that is derived by the self. That is an internal locus of meaning and meaning making. And that will depend on so many different factors, like you've mentioned. So, meaning is such an interesting question because I think that a lot of it is what we make out of thinking about something. For some people, being pregnant is the end of the world. And for other people, not being pregnant is the end of the world. And I think it will depend on so many different aspects. It will depend on societally where we are. It will depend on our age range and age group. You can imagine that being a teenage girl, being pregnant is the end of the world. But I have friends who are well in their 40s, and for them, being pregnant is the end of the world. And so there has to be a set of ideas and beliefs that we have that then determines how we view things outside in the world. And of course, how our lives are then viewed from that prism is, I think, what is the most interesting question because these questions will also change over time. You may, at some time in your life, feel like, okay, this is something that I really, truly, deeply desire. And then with experiences and different relationships or just different time passing, you then start to consider, okay, what I once wanted and what once was important to me is no longer as important to me, and something else has taken that place and has become important to me in a different way. So, fertility is one of those really interesting concepts that, at one stage in our lives, it will be strongly meaningful. And for a huge part of humans, it's this whole kind of tribal thinking to a certain extent, where we want to be a part of a group. And I remember early in my 20s and early 30s, before I had children, thinking, as my friends were having children, thinking that was something that I wanted. And the more of my friends that had children, then I would look back and go, "Ooh, is that something that is really important to me? Or am I wanting this because other people in my friend group actually has it? And am I wanting it because I want to be part of this group experience, this kind of club, this motherhood club that supposedly exists?" And I look back at that now, and of course, having conceived, having had two children, I look back now and there are days that I want to give them back. To love your kids, love your babies, but it's just how it is. And if I was to think about that idea of having more children, that has changed for me in a big way. And so the only explanation that I have in terms of being human is that often we want things that either we can't have, or we want things because we are comparing ourselves to others. And not that fertility is that experience that if you don't have it, you will regret it. Because some people, my sister, for example, decided that she never wanted to have children. And she's very happy with that decision. And she's at a stage now that she can no longer have children. Even if she wanted to, she would have to use donor egg or alternative ways of doing it. But she ended up deciding that for her and her life and the kind of vision that she had for her own life, that a dog was going to be more of benefit. It was going to serve her purposes a whole lot more. And so this is essentially what it comes down to. I think that it's such an individual decision, but that is usually informed by our beliefs, our values, our preferences, how we view the world massively impacts how we believe to be fertile. What does that actually mean for the individual is going to be so dependent on our early childhood experiences, on our formative year experiences, and also I think where we find ourselves in our world, in our lives at this time. I certainly know that for me, when I think about fertility, I think about creativity. Those two are very interlinked for me because the act of creativity, the act of creation is one of the same. And whether you're creating a beautiful meal or you're creating an art piece of work or you're creating a principle applies across all of those experiences. Of course, some are more lasting than others, like a baby will last many more years than a wonderful meal. But at the same time, I think that we often get so focused on things having to look a certain way, and we miss the fact that, well, actually, in being fertile and in being creative, there are different ways of experiencing that same energy and that same feeling, that same interest. And I know that there will be some people that will completely disagree with me because they will go, no, a baby is the only way that fertility is expressed in my mind and in my mind view. And that will be true, especially when people are having difficulty,
Mm.
because there is no other time in a human's experience that we want something more than when we are told we can't have it. And whether that is we're told by another person or whether we're told by our body behaving in a certain way that's against where we would like it to be or how we would like it to express. But I think that's also where that curiosity often comes in, to be able to really go, okay, let's peel these layers. And that's certainly part of the work when I treat patients. I'm encouraging them all the time to dig deeper into, okay, what does this mean to you? What is this experience and this challenge teaching you? What is the lesson that it's bringing? And I love how Tara Brach, the Buddhist teacher, talks about this conflict that we have with the things that we don't want. And instead of trying to push it away, to befriend it, she talks about having tea with Mora, which is this idea of instead of fighting the things that we don't want, quote unquote, it's about how we sit with that and how we see it express and the questions that we ask of it and how we try to befriend that aspect of ourselves that we're trying to fight. Because truly, the patients that I see that have the most difficult time through infertility and then after overcoming infertility, having a baby, are the ones that cannot find peace in what is. They cannot find peace in the struggle. They cannot find peace in finally overcoming it. And then they cannot find peace in the fact that motherhood is hard and there are things that you're not going to like about it. And it doesn't make you a bad person, that sometimes you just wish that child would sleep, you know, or go and play by itself or do something else. And so there is that huge amount of guilt that people usually feel for not being able to do the thing. And then, am I doing it perfectly? And then after doing it, is this still going to be good enough? Am I good enough? So there's so many questions intertwined in all of that.
So many. I have so many too. I have at least six that I've racked up while listening to that. It's so much in there, Gabriela. It's wonderful. As they say, how we do anything is how we do everything. I think Martha Beck said that. And isn't it interesting that fertility or pregnancy, like anything, can become this holy grail on which we project all our hopes, aspirations, and self worth? And lo and behold, even when we achieve, quote unquote, that outcome, we still are dealing with our own internal challenges. I wanted to add to what you said too, to that list of contextual circumstances of culture and group and belonging and our tribe, is also, of course, that some people really don't want a child unless they have a intimate partnership to have it with, as opposed to some people who want a child so badly they're willing to go it alone and have a child. And I'm just curious what you have seen about that. I, for one, wasn't, I wanted children, but I didn't want to do it without the partner, and that partner didn't happen while I could still have children. So I, on the other hand, know people that were just like, didn't find the partner, not going to wait for the partner, and I'm going to do this. And wow, is that a different path?
Really. I laugh because this is exactly what I mean when I talk about meaning, and particularly in terms of this particular conversation. It's so interesting because I have had in 25 years, as you can imagine, having treated thousands and thousands of patients, every possible permutation on this conversation that you can experience and that you can imagine. This is missing so many different things that it makes me really curious of how do people think about this. But I'll tell you this. There are some people, certainly, and I think that it's the vast majority. When I look at my entire patient data set, it would be over 95% of people come to us in a heterosexual relationship with a partner. Okay. Now, that's not to say that those are the only people that we treat. We treat anybody who comes in for treatment who wants
Mhm.
support. So, from that perspective, like I've had polyamorous relationships with all sorts of different types of permutations. And that's fine that people want to have that kind of dynamic and they know that's essentially what they're getting into. But I've had women who have come to me straight and lesbians who basically were like, okay, you know what? I don't want a man. I want to have a baby, but I don't want the man. And so I'm going to do this by myself. Whereas I've had other women in exactly the same situation that you've said, which is I don't want to wait for a man. And then, of course, there are women who are like, I don't want to do this with a man. And there are situations like yours and like myself who I would not want to have a baby without a husband because for me, in my mind, it was just too hard. It was just too much work. Like it was just, I don't know that I could have coped. And actually, quite frankly, I say to my patients who are brave enough, and I really think that's just bravery, it's sheer courage to decide that you are not going to wait for a man and that you're not going to sit around and you're going to go and do it yourself and you're going to have your baby. I'm in awe of those women. Honestly, I view myself and I think of myself as a pretty strong person, but I'm not that strong. I personally couldn't do that. And so when these women come to me and they're like, okay, I'm not waiting for a man, or I don't want a man and I'm going to do this myself, I'm like, all right, we will be your support system and we'll be here with you. But it's again, and I think that there are so many different aspects of the concept of how you envision family and home. What does that actually mean? So, when you ask what are the types of situations that people come and how do they actually conceptualize that, I've seen all sorts of different things, like I said before. And so it just really, I think it's a very personal decision. And I think that there is no right or wrong. Like sometimes I tell you what, had this one lady who came to me, she was so committed to having a baby. She ended up being at the stage where she could no longer have a baby with her own eggs. So she decided to do donor egg. And she went through 4 donor, and then she came to me with that kind of history. And she basically went on to conceive and have her daughter with donor child on her own. And she is the most incredible mother. She takes this child camping and doing all of these things that normally you would wait for a guy to do it. So I think that the life you envision is ultimately going to come down to the beliefs that you hold. And then, of course, that's going to translate into the things that you choose from there. It's a very interesting thing how people show up and what they decide to do based on those beliefs.
Okay, so let's open another topic here adjacent to this, which is when people decide, or perhaps they have always known that they do want a pregnancy, and then their bodies don't get pregnant. And some people can view that as, oh, my body's betraying me being the one, the cognitive one, or the psychological or the emotional one who's decided on this thing. And yet then this body that is just this physiological either vehicle and or barrier at this point, obstacle or enemy to what I am wanting. What is your view of that? Because I realize this gets into really the depth of what you do and all the different factors that don't tend to be looked at when people don't conceive or come to term. But I think this is a really interesting, what could be viewed as a split. Or is the body knowing something that our cognitive minds don't know about pregnancy, about the readiness for pregnancy, about the appropriateness, you could say, or the viability or the health of pregnancy. And therefore, there's a reason why the body isn't getting pregnant, at least under those particular circumstances, which I know is your life work to help people discover and change. But I'm curious about what this discrepancy that can be so painful for people reflects for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because for most people, the mental component, the mind body component of having a baby is rarely what gets in the way for most people. And I can say this with a very strong level of certainty because what we know from population studies is that in the general population, for people who want to get pregnant, 96.3% of them will conceive within 2 years of trying. So this is population data. So we know that the majority of people don't struggle to have a baby. And yet the statistics show us that 1 in 6 couples has difficulty conceiving or keeping a pregnancy to term. But again, if we zoom out into what that means for the general population, it's less than 4% of people who actually really struggle. And out of those 4%, it's a tiny percentage of people who will struggle because of major traumatic events that then stops their body from doing what it would normally do. And there are situations where trauma will cause, instead of just being correlated, will actually cause somebody to shut down and completely decide consciously or unconsciously that they will not conceive. Those cases exist, they are real. And each person, when you are unraveling this in a case and in a situation, it's almost like you do have to peel those layers very gently because that ultimately, in the cases where it is a trauma situation, there's usually a lot to unearth in those.
Do you have an example of
Oh,
like, no?
childhood sexual trauma in general, like sometimes even just major psychological trauma from abusive households and growing up in abusive households, all of those types of situations of very specific kind of mental emotional trauma could certainly induce a situation where a person does not feel safe and therefore feels like reproduction is also unsafe. as a result of that. There's a wonderful book, The Body Keeps the Score. And what is his name? Van Kirk?
Yeah.
I forget
Kolk.
the researcher's
Vander
name.
Kolk.
Kolk. That's right. That's right. And so his research is really interesting because it shows exactly this. It's this whole idea of how our emotional life impacts and the body keeps that memory and that score of what's going on. And again, the evidence in that kind of realm is very robust and it's a growing body of research for a reason. In saying that, for the majority of people, and certainly the majority of people that I see, the issues are more physical and biological. When they become emotional or psychological, it's usually as a result of the fertility journey itself not having been easy or straightforward. So it's almost an infertility or recurrent kind of failure, whether it's inability to conceive through fertility treatment or natural conception, or because a pregnancy loss event keeps occurring. That experience in itself has been demonstrated to cause trauma in people, not just women, in people who
Absolutely.
are in relationships going through infertility, miscarriage, failed treatments. So it's almost like the the trauma exists in both of those kinds of scenarios, i.e., whether it's being induced and therefore it has caused or has been a result, infertility has been a result, but certainly infertility and even going through infertility treatment itself also induces and adds additional trauma to that situation. There's a lot of evidence that supports the notion that not only do we have that trauma associated with infertility, miscarriage, failed treatments, but that the relationship of that couple is also heavily impacted, and that the dynamics of that relationship can actually be drastically damaged as a result of going through fertility difficulties if a couple is unaware of the fact that, okay, this is a challenge, this is a problem, and we need to find coping mechanisms together in order to manage and navigate what's
Absolutely.
going on. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that most people need to also understand and to really have on the forefront of their mind that because of fertility treatments, some people, and it's really interesting what I see, some couples, because of the difficulty that they're going through, and the difference in those couples is one very specific thing. And I think that John Gottman's research gets to the bottom of this, and it really applies to fertility, which is when couples are going through difficult situations, the ones that turn toward each other rather than away from each other always fare best. And I see this in my clinic. I see that infertility is very difficult. I did a creation story with one of my couples yesterday. They had been trying for 8 years. We found so many different things when they came for treatment in the clinic. And in that whole time, imagine this, she was 27 at the time that they started trying to get pregnant. And in that time, she was just being told, oh, everything is fine, just keep trying. Because she was young, most people who are young going through fertility challenges get dismissed in the healthcare
Mm.
system because they're young and we know that 96.3% of them are going to conceive anyway. And so it's, oh, you know what? We don't need to spend healthcare system resources on a young couple who's going to conceive and eventually have a baby no matter what. But the problem is that when you are having difficulties in your 20s, that is hugely abnormal because in your 20s, you're
Mm.
supposed to have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. You're no longer having this conversation. When this has gone 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 years, you clearly have a problem. After 2 years, you clearly have a problem. And so, how you navigate that is going to be dependent on how strong your relationship is before you've ascertained that you have a problem. If the relationship has already been difficult and traumatic in itself, it's going to be a lot harder to go through infertility or fertility challenges than if a relationship is good and a couple has a good solid foundation. So there's so many different aspects of that that will also either increase and enhance the challenge that people experience because fertility is already a difficult situation. You add a relationship that is on the rocks or that is
Yeah.
very difficult and traumatic as it is, you're going to end up with an even bigger issue. And so I think that sometimes when women or couples are in a situation where the relationship is problematic, sometimes people have this tendency of romanticizing the idea of having a baby and thinking that, oh, if we have a baby, this is going to be better. It will be 20 million times worse. It will not. A relationship that is not good now is only going to get worse by adding a baby to it. 65% of couples after having a baby report lower relationship satisfaction as a result of having a baby. So if you don't have a good relationship, it is only going to get worse until eventually it gets a little bit better. But it may not have the opportunity to get a little bit better because you might actually break up halfway through because the relationship was bad to begin with. And so, this is the thing that I think a lot of times people really dismiss, which is the importance of having that ability to self correct as a couple and to navigate challenges together and to really be able to objectively assess how is our relationship and is bringing a baby into this relationship, especially when we are now dealing with fertility difficulties as well, the best thing to do at this particular point in time.
Yeah, this is why I do the work that I do. You do the work that you do to help couples navigate this. Because, of course, if there have been miscarriages, then there's grief. In family constellation work, we consider that an actual death. As soon as there's a conception, there is a being that has to be grieved, which often doesn't happen. Or, of course, it changes how people have their intimate relationship, if they have sex, how they're having sex. Is it only in this
Yeah.
utilitarian sort of procreative way? And does that
Yeah.
really change the intimacy dynamic? And there's blame, and there's people are then ending up having, going back to our conversation about meaning, people are having children for different reasons, and they're not really clarifying that with each other. They're not on the same page. And all that work, of course, becomes even more necessary and exacerbated by these challenges. And then you bring in the financial factor. My God, all that money. So
Yeah.
let's talk too about how you have had so much success with helping people discover the underlying physiological or biochemical issues, and specifically toxicity issues and lifestyle issues that can really be affecting why people aren't getting pregnant, both from the male side and the female side. Do you want to talk about that?
My original training is as a naturopathic clinician. So, naturopathic medicine is where I began the work that I do. And then I went on to do a master's in reproductive medicine and human genetics. And I did a master's in public health and then later a doctorate in public health at Harvard. And what was interesting and what has been an absolute constant thread in the way that I look at fertility and I look at health is the fact that the body knows what to do. The body is so innately wise and so perfect in so many ways. And one of the things that I am so in awe about is how, when you remove the obstacles to optimum health, you all of a sudden have an entirely different conversation with the body about fertility. And so I think that you need to do less for the body to be as fertile as possible than more. And unfortunately, in the way in which the healthcare system is organized and how medicine treats patients going through this challenge, it's about intervention. It's about making the body do things that it should do better. That's not how it works, in my opinion. And certainly in my experience, having treated literally thousands of patients, what I know to be true is that, yes, sometimes we need antibiotics. Yes, sometimes we've gotten over the point where surgery is unnecessary. We may need surgery. We may need kind of treatments that aren't simply a matter of removing obstacles, and sometimes they are the obstacles. But for the most part, it's amazing to me how often when we approach fertility and when we approach health to optimize fertility from a perspective of if you were pregnant right now, and you were wanting to give your baby the healthiest possible start in life, what are all of the things that you would absolutely start doing and stop doing to ensure that your baby was the healthiest it could be? It's incredible how the body transforms itself. If I was to ask probably any woman, and even men, what are the things that you would say to your partner, or what would you say to yourself if you were pregnant right now? What are all of the things that you would absolutely start doing and that you would absolutely stop doing if you were gestating your child and if you were nurturing that baby to the best possible start in life? What are those things? Everybody can answer that question. It's really fascinating to me how really there isn't a person who wouldn't come up with a very long list of things if prodded. And yet we forget that's what it takes. And that's what it takes way before a baby is even in situ, has even been created, and is even being gestated. And the more we remember that, the more we remember that the body knows what to do. The body is an incredible organism of homeostatic balance. And if we look at what balance actually means, which we can't measure balance, we can only measure degrees away from balance. Therefore, what that means is that we need to understand that if we remove the obstacles and we give the body what it needs in order to be as healthy as possible, and those things would be good quality sleep, movement, nutritious and nourishing food, clean and filtered water, already we are so far ahead of essentially ensuring that the body has the building blocks to do what it needs to do. And then you go on the other side of that and you remove the things that we know damage cells and damage the body. Drinking, smoking, the opposite of everything else that I've talked about, ultra processed foods, and so on. And all of a sudden, the body has a foundation that it can actually utilize to do exactly what it can do normally. Now, what happens is that often we have spent so much time, sometimes years, sometimes decades, in doing things that don't support that better quality of life and better quality of health, that our body has to compensate somehow, and it will get thrown off its natural homeostatic balance. And that in itself is usually what starts to create disease states. And once we have that, the way in which we might need to address it is going to be different to how we would address it if we caught that situation or that issue earlier on and started to influence it earlier on. But even in that situation, and this is something that I see very frequently, by the time people come to me, and we know this because this was my master's thesis at Harvard, was looking at the fertility breakthrough program and the kinds of patients that were coming to us. And we did a study that involved 544 patients looking at the live birth rate, looking at what kinds of people were coming to us and what was their circumstances. And what we found was that the average number of years that people had been infertile by the time they came to me was 4 years, plus or minus about 2.5 years. We found that almost 50% had experienced failed IVF treatment, more than 50% had experienced recurrent miscarriage. And what we noted was that at the end of treatment, 78.8% of them had taken home healthy babies. And so when we looked at that and we looked at, okay, how long did that take? And this was a really interesting finding that we've since really put a lot more effort into getting people to do things faster. But what we found was that even on an average of 4 years of infertility, The average number of months that it took for people to get pregnant was 12, plus or minus about 9 months, which meant that some people conceived within 3 months despite long-standing infertility, and some people took longer than that. And then when I went back to look at, okay, but was that standard deviation so high? Why was it that some people with 4 years of infertility conceived within 3 months and others with more than 2 years? And the reason was usually because they didn't action the first step that we get them to do, which is diagnostic testing quickly first. And so, what did that teach me? That was really such an interesting moment for me because when I realized that, okay, some people had started treatment and we start to put in place best practice and the things that they need to do straight away. But instead of going and doing testing immediately, straight away, some people 6 months or 8 months down the track still hadn't done all the testing that we needed them to do. And so, with that, it had delayed us finding the things that weren't just going to be rectified by putting best practice in place, improving lifestyle, improving diet, improving sleep, improving exercise, and all of those things. And so this was a really big learning curve. Now, because we understand this, we do that very differently. We make sure where is your testing? Where are your test results? So that we can start to tweak and fine tune the recommendations to what is currently present immediately so that we get faster results. But ultimately, that was something that was really interesting because what I realized in that was that even though some people didn't action quickly, didn't get their tests, and therefore we found things later, on that 4 year mark of having tried to conceive, many of them went on to have a completely different experience of their body, their health, and their fertility just by applying what we've talked about before, which is that idea of acting pregnant now to get pregnant later, removing the obstacles to optimum health and optimum fertility, and adding the building blocks to good quality health and good quality life. So to me, that was really like it was a moment of reckoning to a certain extent, but also it was a moment of validating that feeling and that idea that the body really does know what to do. So to me, that's just the most miraculous, marvelous thing to be able to connect with that idea that, gosh, there is so much that we don't need to intervene on because if we give it the proper environment, it does what it needs to do beautifully.
Yeah, I wanted to give an example from my own life, which is that I had an osteopath, naturopath many years ago test me with kinesiology, and that I had no problem with conception, but I did with implantation because the uterine lining was toxic. I had never heard that distinction before, that people can not have children because they might be very fertile, but they're not implanting, so they're not gestating to term. And I don't really hear that spoken about. And I'm very curious about that because this was an amazing woman. I sent many people to her who subsequently got pregnant because she knew how to detoxify the uterine lining so that an embryo could stay and grow. Is that common knowledge now? And do you implement that as well?
That's a great question. And so I think that the language is probably just a little bit different. The way that I would express that is probably a little bit different in terms of implantation failure is real. And how do we know that it's real? Well, basically, if you have somebody who goes and does IVF and has embryos and you have an embryo transfer, at the time of transfer, you are pregnant, categorically pregnant. Whether you end up seeing a positive pregnancy test at the end of the 2 week wait or whether you don't is essentially just a matter of implantation. And whether implantation worked or it didn't work, that is going to be determined by many factors, immunological components, microbiome components. Toxins themselves are usually not a reason, although toxin, for example, as in cigarette smoking, is going to be definitely something that's going to reduce implantation. And so the majority of the reasons as to why implantation doesn't happen is usually because there are various means in which it actually can occur. It can be that the lining itself hasn't been prepared enough because of hormonal imbalances. If you don't have enough progesterone, if your progesterone uptake is not what it needs to be, even for example, if the natural conception, if we look at natural conception on its own, if we have an ovulation that is earlier than normal, you're going to end up with a less mature egg, which then releases a less than robust corpus luteum. And that is what makes progesterone. Also, if your lining is impacted in some way from different health conditions, inflammation being one of them, and you have a situation where you have increased inflammation, you're going to have decreased implantation. And increased inflammation can happen from various reasons, from infections to insulin resistance to you name it. So there's lots of reasons as to why implantation failure may occur. And finding what those reasons are is the most important part of treatment, because you might have implantation failure because you have chlamydia, or you might have implantation failure because you have insulin resistance or you've got prediabetes and you haven't been diagnosed. And it could be a combination of various factors too. It could be the fact that you have sperm that, let's call it toxic. Toxicity in sperm is a real thing. It causes lots of different oxidative stress. It causes it to be morphologically not shaped properly, not swim properly, you name it. So there is the female factor, there is the male factor, there is the embryonic factor, and then of course there is the environment in which it's going to actually implant itself. So things like endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, that has now been renamed to polyendocrine metabolic syndrome, PMOS, no longer PCOS. So again, there are various reasons as to why it occurs. Understanding what those reasons are. Like, for example, today I talked to a lady who is 40, who has had 4 IVF cycles that haven't worked. And she's been told that in fact, there haven't been IVF cycles, there have been ICSI cycles. ICSI cycles are usually done when there are sperm parameter issues. And so she's done 4 ICSI cycles. In every cycle, she's had 4 eggs. In one cycle, she's had 10 eggs and 0 embryos each time. And so I'm looking at this case and I'm like, hang on a second, 10 eggs, 0 embryos. ICSI. Why? Go look at the semen analysis. I'm like, there's a sperm issue here. And she's being told, oh, it's an egg issue. Just get a donor egg. And I'm like, I beg your pardon. So the reason she's being told to get a donor egg is because a 20-year-old egg, yes, will fix more of the DNA fragmentation errors within the sperm. Sure. But why not just go fix the DNA fragmentation issue in the sperm and use the eggs that she's really getting?
I was going to ask you about that. And unfortunately, we're coming to time. And I do ask everybody 2 last questions, but I did want to slip that in whether or not the gender balance or is hopefully becoming more balanced, the attribution, if not the blame, between male and female couples.
Look, I think that I'm not a very well liked person when it comes to this conversation because I will always attribute fertility to a team sport. Love it,
Love
see?
it. Yeah.
And so it is absolutely a 50-50 equation. And when I see, especially the egg, women already have to do too much when it comes to everything else about having a baby. Let's be honest. And the thing about it is that it's the egg's responsibility. Imagine nature has made the female egg responsible for fixing the DNA fragmentation and errors within the sperm. And so what happens is that if you have a 40-year-old egg, it will no longer be able to fix as many errors as a 20-year-old egg. But the sperm gets more DNA errors and fragmentation issues as a man ages, just as the egg quality decreases and declines. So the sperm quality, if we're not working on syntropy, which is optimization and improving cellular function and health, we are going to have to deal with entropy. We are going to have to deal with that natural decline. And so to sit back and think that men are exempt from having to do the work, I am sorry. What
Yeah.
century is this exactly? And so, no, no. And not only that, women already have to get up in the middle of the night, feed this baby. What is going on here? So, and I say this in jest, but also very seriously, which is if you want, as a couple, to overcome infertility, miscarriage, and failed treatments, and those things are interrelated and they are integrated, what is going to happen is that you have to work together as a team and you have to address both prospective parents, because otherwise you are going to be placing all of the onus on the one thing that you cannot fully control, which is how much that egg is going to be able to fix in terms of everything else that's going on within the sperm. So, my opinion, and certainly the experience that I see in terms of the patients that I treat, when we improve sperm parameters and improve sperm health, we improve live birth outcomes. Full stop. So there is no such thing as he's fine. It's like, what the hell does that mean? Yeah, of course you know he's fine. You married him. So clearly he's fine. But what you need to make sure of is that the things that are tested and the things that are actually going to be important that will change clinical outcomes are investigated and are addressed. And if men are not taking responsibility for the very least thing that they can do, which is what kind of sperm they're bringing into that situation, I question whether we really should be bringing a baby into the world based on those circumstances, because it's like, what? What is going on? So, no, I really do feel like it's a very important conversation to have. And I love my patients because they come to me so ready. The guys that come to my clinic, they're like, tell me what to do. Let's go. I'm like, let's. Whereas others who are like, oh no, this is a woman's issue. Please don't come to me. I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. I didn't even know eggs fixed sperm. That's a whole new concept to me. Amazing. I would love to know more about that, but our time is running out.
We'll have to do a part two.
I would love that, Gabrielle. I would love that. I do have a lot of other things to ask you, but for right now, I wanted to ask you how you define embodiment.
I like that question. I have to think about this for a moment.
Yeah.
Embodiment. I think presence is how I would define that. For me, I really feel the most connected when I meditate. So that's one thing, but I also train. Bodybuilding and weightlifting is something that has been a part of my life for many years. The times and moments in my day that I am most connected and most present and most embodied are in the pauses, are in those moments where I'm just like, all right, what comes next? And there's such power in that. There's such strength in being able to just pause and connect and then go, this is my next step. So, embodiment for me is about presence.
Love it. And lastly, what do you enjoy most about being your particular body?
Ooh, experiences that it affords me, the ability to make choices and exercise them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I loved how we entered the conversation and that opportunity to really think about meaning and what it means to do these things. And I think that there's so much there in terms of choice and exercising those choices and those decisions that we typically take for granted. I think that so much of what we do in our day to day, even in the decision of having children, is almost pre selected. It's a default in the consciousness
Yeah.
of society. It's like you're going to get married, you're going to have children, you're going to do these things. And to be able to stop and think about, well, actually, what does it mean? And the fact that these are considerations, and how lucky and fortunate we are, really, that we get to make those kinds of choices, because there are still people in the world today who they don't get to make the choices that we get to make. So I think it's beautiful and reverent to really be able to connect with that.
Well, if we do a part two, I can already think about a question, even just in terms of our evolution, how it's been that we've needed to have children for our own evolutionary imperative, survival imperative, to now facing climate change and how that's affecting, for example, my nieces and nephews' decisions about whether or not they're going to have children. So let's get into that if we go ahead with another conversation, because obviously the context and the set of criteria that people are now considering has changed as we're in this unprecedented time. So,
Yeah, yeah,
to be
absolutely. No, I
continued.
think that's an interesting conversation. Absolutely.
Thank you again, and blessings to all the beautiful work you're doing, Gabriela. Truly.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you for having
My
me, and
pleasure.
really honored by your conversation today and really your kind words. So thank you. Thank you so much. Keep
My
up the
pleasure.
amazing work that you do.
Likewise. Okay, take care. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Brilliant Body Podcast. To continue exploring your body's brilliance, you can visit the show notes for resources and free events. Also, if you'd like to learn more about working with me, visit alimezey.com. And just one more thing. There's a reason podcasters blather on about ratings and reviews, because they truly help these conversations reach more bodies who are ready to reclaim their brilliance too. And it's so easy. You just go to the main page of the show, scroll down and look for those 5 stars and click. And please follow us if you haven't already. And even better, write a rave review. I'd so appreciate it. Until next time, as always, even more than ever, keep reclaiming your brilliant body.